Welcome to the London Gritty Chronicles. Imagine a sound. It is the roar of 1,000 wooden wheels on cobblestones. It is the shouting of merchants, the barking of dogs, the ringing of church bells, and a constant, heavy hum of human ambition. This is the sound of a thriving metropolis. It is the sound of life. Now, imagine that sound is cut. Not faded, not lowered. Cut. Imagine walking down the widest street in the city at noon, and the only sound you hear is the echo of your own boots, and the wind whistling through empty market stalls. This is not a story about a disease. We have heard enough stories about biology. This is a story about silence. It is a story about what happens to the human mind and human society when the machinery of daily life suddenly breaks. Today, we are looking at social collapse. Welcome to London, 1665. But also, welcome to any city in any century where the normal rules of survival no longer apply. For you, the English learner, this is a unique opportunity. Usually, you learn English for business, for travel, or for polite conversation. But history does not always offer polite conversation. To truly master a language, you must know how to describe the extremes of the human experience. In this series, we will focus on 3 specific areas of vocabulary. First, descriptive adjectives, words that paint a picture of atmosphere. Second, verbs of disruption, action words that show how systems fail. And third, idioms of survival, phrases we use when we are enduring hard times. Let us begin with the before. To understand the horror of the silence, we must first understand the noise. In the early spring of 1665, London was what we call a bustling hub of trade. Listen to that word, bustling. B-U-S-T-L-I-N-G. It means full of energetic and noisy activity. A market is bustling. A train station is bustling. It implies chaos, but productive chaos. The River Thames was choked with ships. They brought spices from the east, timber from the north, and silk from the south. The wharves were piled high with goods. In the taverns, men shouted over cups of ale, making deals, arguing politics, and sharing gossip. The air was thick with smoke, yes, but also with possibility. Society functioned on a very specific web of trust. You trusted the baker to bake bread. You trusted the watchman to guard the street. You trusted the ship captain to bring the cargo. This is what sociologists call social cohesion. It is the glue that holds a community together. But in the parish of St. Giles in the Fields, a poor district outside the city walls, something was unraveling. It started slowly, a few deaths, then a few more. In the 17th century, London published a weekly document called the Bills of Mortality. Think of this as a grim scorecard. It listed who died and what killed them. Usually, the list included things like old age, consumption, or fever. But in late spring, the clerks who wrote these bills began to hesitate. They saw bodies with strange marks. Hard, painful swellings in the neck or the groin. These were called buboes. If a clerk wrote plague on the bill of mortality, it triggered a legal chain reaction. A house would be shut, trade would stop, panic would rise. So often, They lied. They wrote spotted fever. They wrote teeth. They wrote surfeit. They used euphemisms. A euphemism is a mild or indirect word substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt. Instead of saying plague, which meant doom, they said visitation or distemper. Why? Because the economy was more important than the truth, at least in the beginning. But biology does not care about the economy. By June, the summer heat arrived. In London, heat makes the smells of the city rise. The waste in the streets began to ferment, and the numbers on the bills of mortality began to climb. The deception could not last. This brings us to our first major shift in the story, the transition. It is the moment when concern turns into alarm, and alarm turns into terror. How do you describe this shift in English? We use verbs like erode, crumble, and evaporate. We say, public confidence began to erode. We say, the social order began to crumble. We say, the bustling crowds evaporated. Imagine you are a shopkeeper in Cheapside, the main market street. On a Tuesday, you see your neighbor packing a wagon. You ask him, "Where are you going?" He doesn't look you in the eye. He mumbles, "To the country, for fresh air." He is lying. He is fleeing. The next day, 2 more shops are closed. The shutters are barred. By Friday, the street is missing half its people. This is the phenomenon of exodus. An exodus is a mass departure of people. The king, Charles II, left. The royal court left. The lawyers, the rich merchants, the doctors, those with money, they packed their carriages and fled. Who was left behind? The poor, the servants, the apprentices, the people who had nowhere to go. This creates a feeling of abandonment. Try to feel the weight of that word. Abandonment. It is not just being left alone. It is being left behind by the people who were supposed to protect you. When the institutions weaken, when the king leaves, when the doctors flee, the community that remains enters a state of high anxiety. In historical English, and even in modern reporting, we often describe this atmosphere as ominous. Ominous, giving the impression that something bad or unpleasant is going to happen. The sky seemed ominous. The silence was ominous. By July 1665, the Lord Mayor of London issued orders. These were strict. They were brutal. And they changed the landscape of the city completely. If a person in a house got sick, the house was not treated like a hospital. It was treated like a prison. The authorities would send a guard, a watchman, to stand outside the door. He was there to ensure no one came out. Imagine this. You are healthy, but your brother or your servant falls ill. The authorities come. They nail the door shut from the outside. They paint a red cross on the timber, and above the cross they write the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." You are locked in with the dying. You are quarantined. Quarantine. This word comes from the Italian quaranta, meaning 40. Originally, ships had to wait 40 days. In London, it meant usually a month of confinement. But here is the English lesson in the tragedy. The word quarantine implies isolation for safety. But for the people inside, it felt like a death sentence. A death sentence is a formal declaration that someone is to be executed. But we use it metaphorically to mean a situation from which there is no escape. The streets began to change physically. Without the thousands of feet walking every day, something strange happened to the cobblestones. Grass began to grow. This is a powerful image for scene setting. Grass grew in the streets of the capital. It signifies neglect and stagnation. Stagnation means a lack of activity, growth, or development. Water stagnates when it does not flow. It becomes poisonous. A city stagnates when trade stops. The sounds changed too. The bustling roar was gone. It was replaced by two specific sounds. One was the tolling of bells. Funeral bells. At first, they rang constantly. Ding, ding, ding. But eventually, the sheer number of dead was so high that the authorities banned the bells. The constant ringing was driving people mad with fear. The second sound was the voice of the carter. At night, when the heat broke, carts would rumble over the stones. These were not carrying food. They were collecting bodies. The cry went out. "Bring out your dead!" This phrase, "bring out your dead," has become a cliché in movies. But in 1665, it was a practical instruction. It was a service. It represents the collapse of the individual ritual. Usually, a funeral is a personal, sacred event. You mourn. You wear black. You walk to the churchyard. But in a collapse, the individual is erased. Death becomes industrial. It becomes anonymous. Anonymous, of a person not identified by name. The bodies were not buried in family plots. They were taken to plague pits, massive trenches dug in the fields. Now, pause and look at the emotional landscape. If you are living in this city, what is your dominant emotion? Fear, yes, but specifically, suspicion. Suspicion is a feeling that someone is guilty of something, or that something is wrong. You look at your neighbor. Do they look pale? Are they sweating? Did they buy extra food yesterday? The community, which used to function on trust, now functions on paranoia. Paranoia is a mental condition characterized by delusions of persecution, unwarranted jealousy, or exaggerated self-importance. In this context, it means an intense, irrational fear of others. We see the rise of what we call informants. An informant is a person who gives information to another. In this dark time, people would report their neighbors to the watchman. "I heard coughing in that house," they would whisper. Why? Because if the sickness spreads, I might die. Self-preservation overrides community loyalty. This is a bleak picture, I know, but it is necessary to set the scene. We have moved from the bustling, noisy, arrogant city of trade to a silent, suspicious, grassy wasteland of locked doors and red crosses. However, the story does not end with everyone dying in the dark. Because when the official institutions, the government, the church, the medical guild, when they collapse or flee, something else emerges. Human beings are social animals. We cannot survive in total isolation. So, in the gaps left by the rich and powerful, the common people began to organize. They created new systems. They found new ways to trade, to communicate, and to survive. This is the theme of resilience. Resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Toughness. In the next part, we are going to look at the ghost economy. How do you buy food when money might be infected? How do you talk to your lover when you cannot touch them? How do you keep your sanity when the world has gone mad? We will look at the river, the smugglers, and the brave souls who stayed behind. They kept the heart of the city beating. But before we go there, I want you to hold one image in your mind. Picture a single candle burning in a window on a dark street. The door is locked. The red cross is on the wood. But inside, someone is writing a letter. That letter is a voice reaching out from the silence. Silver, gold, copper. For centuries, these metals were the most desired objects in London. Men killed for them. Merchants sailed across the world for them. To hold a heavy purse of gold coins was to hold power. But in the summer of 1665, a purse full of coins was no longer a symbol of wealth. It was a potential weapon. Welcome back. We are standing in a marketplace, but it is not the bustling market of Part 1. This is the ghost economy. In this part, we are going to look at how trade survives when physical contact becomes deadly. We will learn vocabulary related to precautions, logistics, and adaptation. Let us observe a transaction. You need meat. You walk to the butcher's stall at the edge of the city fields. You do not shake hands. You do not stand close. There is a barrier, perhaps a rope or a wooden rail, separating you from the butcher. You shout your order. "A leg of mutton!" He places it on a distant stone, or hooks it onto a long pole and extends it towards you. You take it. Now you must pay. But the butcher will not touch your money. Why? Because your hands might carry the contagion. Contagion. The communication of disease from one person to another by close contact. So, you see a small jar or a bucket filled with liquid. It smells sharp and sour. It is vinegar, or perhaps it is just water, but often it is vinegar. Believed to act as a disinfectant. You drop your silver coins into the vinegar. Splash. Only after they have soaked and the poison is washed away will the butcher fish them out. This creates a new kind of social interaction. It is transactional, yes, but it is also deeply wary. Wary, W-A-R-Y, feeling or showing caution about possible dangers or problems. The English phrase, to keep someone at arm's length, is usually an idiom. It means to avoid being too friendly with someone, but here it became a literal survival strategy. Everyone kept everyone at arm's length. This shift changes the psychology of the city. When every object, a coin, a letter, a loaf of bread, is viewed as a vector for death, the world becomes hostile. Vector. In biology, a vector is an organism, typically a biting insect or tick, that transmits a disease or parasite. But in general English, we use it to describe anything that carries a threat from point A to point B. So, how did London not starve? If the shops are closed and the country farmers are too scared to enter the city, where does the food come from? This brings us to the concept of the lifeline. A lifeline is a rope thrown to a drowning person. But metaphorically, it is something that is essential for the survival of someone or something. London's lifeline was the River Thames. While the streets were silent, the river was still breathing. The Lord Mayor, desperate to prevent a famine, negotiated with the country people. They agreed to bring vegetables, grain, and meat, but only to the riverbanks, or to specific fields far outside the walls. Imagine the logistics. This is a supply chain operating under siege conditions. Ships called colliers came from Newcastle in the north, carrying coal. Without coal, Londoners could not cook, and they could not boil water. These ships would anchor in the middle of the river. They would not dock. The risk was too high. Small boats would row out to meet them. The goods were transferred over the water. It was a dance of distance. We call this makeshift. Makeshift. Serving as a temporary substitute, sufficient for the time being. The system was a makeshift solution. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. This highlights a key historical truth. Commerce is like water. It finds a way to flow. Even when the formal institutions, the shops, the Royal Exchange, are closed. The demand for survival creates a new, underground path. But let's look at the human cost of this lifeline. Who were the people rowing the boats? Who were the people carrying the sacks of flour from the river to the plague-stricken houses? They were the essential workers of the 17th century, the watermen, the porters, the watchmen. These people could not afford to flee. They could not afford to quarantine. They had to work to eat. In English, we often describe this situation as living hand to mouth. Hand to mouth. Satisfying only one's immediate needs because of lack of money for the future. You earn a coin, you buy bread, you eat it. If you stop working for one day, you starve. For these people, the plague was a terrifying gamble. Every day they worked, they rolled the dice. Let's focus on the atmosphere of the river at night. Using our descriptive adjectives, we can call it eerie. Eerie. Strange and frightening. The river is usually noisy with drunken sailors. Now it is quiet. The fog settles on the water. You can hear the creak of oars. Sometimes you might see a boat moving with no lights. This is likely a smuggler, or perhaps someone moving a body secretly to avoid the official plague pit. And the shame that came with it. There is a vocabulary of stealth here. Stealth. Cautious and surreptitious action or movement. People moved with stealth. They did not want to be noticed by the authorities. Why? Because the authorities were becoming more aggressive. As the summer dragged on, the rules became tighter. The city was not just sick, it was becoming a police state. The mayor ordered that all dogs and cats be killed. This is a tragic irony of the Great Plague. They believed the animals carried the sickness in their fur. So, thousands of dogs and cats were slaughtered by the city dog killers. We now know, of course, that the plague was carried by fleas on rats. By killing the cats and dogs, the natural predators of rats, The city actually helped the rat population to explode. We call this an unintended consequence. Unintended consequence. A result that was not planned or intended. It is a useful phrase for history and for life. You try to solve a problem, but your solution creates a worse problem. The streets were now filled with the bodies of animals as well as people. The smell was described as putrid. Putrid. Decaying or rotting and emitting a fetid smell. So, we have a city where money is washed in vinegar, food is exchanged on poles, and the river is the only open road. The external systems, trade and transport, are broken, but functioning in a makeshift way. But what about the internal systems? What happens inside the mind when you are locked in a room for 40 days? We have looked at the street and the river. In the next part, we are going inside the house. We are going to examine the psychological siege. How do you cope with boredom, terror, and grief all at once? What happens to religious faith when prayers seem to go unanswered? And we will look at the rise of the quack doctors, the fake healers who sold magic potions to desperate people. The vocabulary will shift from logistics and trade to delusion, remedy, and despair. The river kept the city's body alive, but the city's soul was beginning to crack. That is the sound of the padlock. It is the sound of the state taking control of your freedom. We are now inside. We stood on the riverbanks. Now we are in the bedroom. The windows are closed to keep out the bad air. The curtains are drawn. The heat of the London summer is trapped inside with you. This is the experience of confinement. Confinement. The action of confining, or the state of being confined. It means being restricted in area or volume. You are trapped. For the families locked inside their homes, either because someone was sick or because they were hiding, the house became a pressure cooker. Imagine the psychological state. It is a mix of extreme boredom and extreme terror. You sit at the table. You look at the wall. You listen to the breathing of your family members. Is that breath too shallow? Did he just cough? Is she looking pale? This creates a feeling of claustrophobia. Claustrophobia. Extreme or irrational fear of confined places. But it wasn't just the walls closing in. It was the silence. Without the noise of the street, your mind begins to amplify every small sound. A rat scratching in the wall sounds like a monster. A church bell sounds like a judge's gavel. When human beings are trapped and terrified, they become desperate for a solution. They want control. And when the real doctors have fled to the countryside, who steps in to offer control? The charlatans. This is one of my favorite words in English history. A charlatan is a person falsely claiming to have a special knowledge or skill, a fraud. London was suddenly flooded with them. They posted bills, advertisements, on the street corners, places where servants might see them while fetching water. These posters made incredible claims. The infallible remedy, the royal antidote, plague water. They sold pills made of toad powder. They sold amulets made of dried arsenic to wear around the neck. They sold unicorn horns, which were just ground-up bones. Why did people buy them? Because the charlatans were selling the one thing the government could not provide: hope. In English, We say these people prey on the vulnerable. To prey on someone. It means to hunt and kill for food. But metaphorically, it means to take advantage of someone who is weak or easily deceived. The charlatans preyed on the fears of the poor. This is a lucrative business. Lucrative, producing a great deal of profit. If you believe you are going to die tomorrow, you will spend your last coin today on a bottle of dirty water if the label says cure. Let's look at the vocabulary of remedies. A remedy is a medicine or treatment for a disease or injury. The charlatans often promised a panacea. Panacea. P-A-N-A-C-E-A. A solution or remedy for all difficulties or diseases. This pill cures the plague, the fever, the gout, and sadness. That is a panacea. And in history, if something claims to cure everything, it usually cures nothing. But let us not judge these people too harshly. Science in 1665 was weak. They did not know about germs. They did not know about bacteria. They believed the air itself was poisonous. They called it miasma. Miasma. An unpleasant or unhealthy smell or vapor. If you believe the air is trying to kill you, buying a magic amulet seems like a rational choice. There was another cure that people turned to, one even more powerful than magic potions. Repentance. To repent means to feel or express sincere regret or remorse about one's wrongdoing or sin. The people of London were deeply religious. They did not see the plague as a biological accident. They saw it as a scourge. Scourge. A whip used as an instrument of punishment, or a person or thing that causes great trouble or suffering. They believed God was punishing London for its sins, for its greed, its lust, its pride. So, inside these locked houses, you would hear the sound of weeping and prayer. Families would gather to read the Bible, searching for a reason why they were suffering. This adds a layer of guilt to the fear. Imagine watching your child get sick. You don't just feel sad, you feel responsible. You think, is this happening because I sinned? Is this my fault? The psychological burden was crushing. Now, combine all these elements. You are locked in a hot room, confinement. You are terrified of the air, miasma. You have spent your money on fake cures, charlatans. You believe God is angry with you, repentance. The tension inside the house becomes unbearable. Eventually, people snap. We see the rise of desperate measures. People began to break the rules. If a family member died, they might try to hide the body so the house wouldn't be locked up. They might bribe the watchman. They might climb out of back windows or over rooftops. We call this evasion. Evasion, the action of evading something, escaping or avoiding. The city tried to control the people with locks and laws, but the instinct to survive is stronger than any law. In the next part, we are going to leave the house. We are going to break the rules. We will follow the people who refused to accept their fate. We will look at the fugitives, the people who tried to run the blockade of the city. We will see what happened on the roads leading out of London, where the country people stood with pitchforks, refusing to let the Londoners pass. We will learn the vocabulary of hostility, vigilance, and conflict. The city was a prison, and everyone wanted to break out. A man stands in the middle of a dusty road. He is holding a piece of paper. His hands are shaking. 10 yards in front of him, 3 men are standing with muskets and pitchforks. They are not soldiers. They are farmers, and they look terrified. Welcome to the borderlands. In the previous part, we looked at the prison of the home. Now, we are looking at the prison of the city limits. London is an island of infection. The rest of England is a fortress trying to keep the infection out. This is the story of the fugitives. A fugitive is a person who has escaped from a place or is in hiding, especially to avoid arrest or persecution. Usually, a fugitive is a criminal, but in 1665, a fugitive was simply a father trying to save his children, or a woman trying to reach her sister in the countryside. Thousands of people tried to leave. They packed their bags. They walked north, south, east, and west. They thought, if I can just get to the fresh air, I will be safe. But they forgot one thing. The countryside was watching. To travel, you needed a document. It was called a certificate of health. This is a crucial term. A certificate is an official document attesting to a certain fact. In 1665, this piece of paper was more valuable than gold. It was signed by the Lord Mayor or a justice of the peace. It stated, "This person is free from the plague." If you had one, you might be allowed to pass through the villages. But remember the corruption we talked about. Remember the charlatans. The market for forged certificates was booming. Forged. Copied fraudulently. Fake. People bought fake papers. They lied. And the country people knew it. So, the villages around London transformed. They stopped being welcoming neighbors. They became vigilantes. The farmers blocked the roads with chains. They set up guard posts. They did not care if you had a certificate. They did not care if you were rich. If you were from London, you were a threat. Let's look at the vocabulary of rejection. When the Londoners approached, the farmers would shout commands. "Stand back! Keep your distance! Pass no further!" These are imperatives, direct orders. Imagine the emotion here. You have walked 10 miles in the heat. You are thirsty. You are scared. You see a village with a well of water, and you are met with a gun in your face. The Londoners became pariahs. Pariah. P-A-R-I-A-H. An outcast. Someone who is rejected by a community. It didn't matter if you were healthy. The label Londoner meant death. There are terrible stories from this time. Stories of starving Londoners wandering into fields to steal turnips or berries, only to be chased away by angry mobs. Stories of women giving birth in ditches because no innkeeper would open the door. This creates a deep hostility. Hostility. Unfriendliness or opposition. The country people weren't evil. They were practicing self-preservation. If they let one sick person in, their whole village would die. They knew this. So their cruelty was born from logic. This dynamic teaches us a dark lesson about society. Fear kills empathy. When fear is high enough, we stop seeing people. We only see risks. So, what happened to the fugitives who were turned back? They had 2 choices. Choice 1, return to the infected city. Go back to the hell they tried to escape. Choice 2, live in the wild. Many people simply camped in the fields and forests surrounding London. They built rough shelters, tents made of rags, huts made of branches. They became a ring of desperate campers, living between the city walls and the hostile countryside. We can describe their condition as destitute. Destitute, without the basic necessities of life. No food, no water, no shelter. Rain fell on them, the sun burned them, and yes, the plague found them there too. But among this misery, there were moments of grace. Grace, courtesy and clemency, a disposition to kindness. Some country people were too afraid to let the Londoners in, but they were too kind to let them starve. They established exchange stones. These were large stones on the boundary lines. The country people would place bread, cheese, or meat on the stone, then retreat 100 yards. The Londoners would come forward, take the food, and leave money in a bowl of vinegar on the stone. It was trade without touch, charity at a distance. This proves that even in a collapse, human compassion does not disappear completely. It just changes shape. It becomes careful. It becomes distant. But it survives. So, the fugitives were trapped. The exits were sealed. The pressure inside the city began to rise again. We are now approaching the peak of the crisis. August and September. The heat was relentless. The smells were overpowering. And the death toll was no longer hundreds per week. It was thousands. The systems of burial began to fail. The churchyards were full. The coffins ran out. In the next part, we are going to look at the collapse of ritual. We will see what happens when a society can no longer bury its dead with dignity. We will look at the plague pits. We will learn the vocabulary of overwhelmed systems, mass graves, and the sheer scale of tragedy. The city is no longer just silent. It is overflowing. The ground was hungry. That is a strange sentence, I know. But in September 1665, it felt like the earth itself was opening its mouth to swallow the city. Welcome to the darkest month. We have talked about the silence of the streets. We have talked about the fear in the houses. We have talked about the fugitives on the roads. Now, we must talk about the breaking point. Every culture in the world has rituals for death. We wash the body. We dress it in clean clothes. We say prayers. We bury or cremate it with respect. These rituals are not for the dead. They are for the living. They help us process grief. They tell us that a human life matters. But in September, the math of the plague defeated the rituals of the people. The death toll rose to 7,000 a week, then 8,000. Some historians believe the true number was over 10,000 a week. In a city of only 460,000, the system was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, buried or drowned beneath a huge mass, defeated by force or numbers. The parish clerks could not count fast enough. The searchers could not check the bodies fast enough. And the sextons, the men who dig graves, could not dig fast enough. The churchyards were full. The ground level actually rose because of the number of bodies packed into the soil. So, the authorities made a grim decision. They stopped digging graves. They started digging pits. A pit is a large hole in the ground. These were the infamous plague pits, deep trenches, often 20 feet deep and 40 feet long. The carts would arrive at night. There were no coffins. Wood was too expensive and the carpenters were dead or busy. The bodies were wrapped in simple sheets, or sometimes nothing at all. They were tipped into the pit. Think about the verbs here. Tipped, dumped, stacked. These are industrial words. They are words you use for garbage, not for people. This created a sense of desecration. Desecration. The action of treating something sacred with violent disrespect. To the people of the 17th century, burial in consecrated ground was essential for the soul. Being thrown into a pit like a dog was a spiritual nightmare. The scene at the pits was horrific. We have accounts of people screaming, trying to jump into the pit to be with their loved ones. We have descriptions of the smell, which was so strong it made the carters vomit. But, and here is the twist, it also created a strange kind of equality. In the pit, the rich merchant lay next to the beggar. The lady in silk lay next to the servant in rags. The plague was the great leveler. Leveler. Something that removes distinctions or inequalities. Death stripped away titles and money. In the dark of the earth, everyone was the same. Let's look at the atmosphere of the city during this peak. The descriptive adjective is macabre. Macabre. M-A-C-A-B-R-E. Disturbing and horrifying because of involvement with or depiction of death and injury. The city was macabre. There were stories of nurse keepers, women hired to care for the sick, who would murder their patients to steal their jewelry. Before the official examiners arrived. There were stories of infected people, driven mad by the high fever, running naked through the streets, singing wild songs until they collapsed. This is delirium. Delirium, an acutely disturbed state of mind that occurs in fever, intoxication, and other disorders, and is characterized by restlessness, illusions, and incoherence. The city was delirious. And yet, amid the horror, the administration did not completely vanish. This is a surprising fact about London. The government actually stayed remarkably resilient. The Lord Mayor, Sir John Lawrence, stayed. He did not flee. The aldermen, the city councillors, mostly stayed. They met every day. They issued orders. They ensured that bread was baked. They ensured the pumps brought water. We often think of collapse as total anarchy, but often it is a mix of anarchy and bureaucracy. Bureaucracy. Excessively complicated administrative procedure, or, simply, the system of government administration. The bureaucracy kept working. They paid the carters, they paid the body collectors, they organized the fires. Ah yes, the fires. In early September, the desperate authorities tried a new strategy. They believed the air was too heavy, too poisonous. They thought they needed to purify it. So they ordered huge bonfires to be lit in the streets. Imagine this visual. It is night. The streets are empty of people. But every 12 houses, there is a fire burning. Coal, wood, and pitch, a sticky black substance, were burned. The city was filled with smoke. Thick, black, choking smoke. They hoped the heat would kill the miasma. It did not work. In fact, the smoke probably made people's lungs weaker. But it shows us the desperation. Desperation. a state of despair, typically one which results in rash or extreme behavior. They were willing to burn the city to save it. Now, pause and check your understanding. We have moved from 1. The bustling trade. 2. The initial silence. 3. The locked houses. 4. The failed escapes. 5. The mass graves and the fires. The city is at rock bottom. The fever is at its height. The smoke is everywhere. But history teaches us that plagues follow a curve, a bell curve. They rise, they peak, and then they break. But how? Why? In the next part, we are going to look at the turning point. We will explore the mystery of why the plague stopped. Was it the cold weather? Was it the fires? Or was it something else? Something biological that the people of 1665 could not see? We will also look at the first signs of recovery, the moment when the first person dares to open a window, the moment when the bells stop tolling for death and start tolling for life. We will learn vocabulary for subsiding, cautious optimism, and aftermath. The fire is burning low. The dawn is coming. But what will the city look like in the light? A single leaf falls from a tree. It is brown. It is crisp. It lands on the cobblestones. Then another. Then another. In a normal year, the falling leaves of autumn signal the coming of winter, a time of hardship. But in London, 1665, the falling leaves signaled something else. They signaled salvation. We have walked through the fire. We have seen the pits. Now, we are going to watch the fever break. In medical English, when a patient survives the worst part of a sickness and begins to recover, we say, the fever has broken. In October 1665, the fever of the city finally broke. But it did not happen with a bang. It happened with a chill. The wind changed direction. The oppressive, stagnant heat of the summer was blown away by the sharp, cold winds of the Atlantic. The temperature dropped. Why does this matter? Because biology is sensitive to temperature. The rat flea, Xenocilla chiopus, is the engine of the plague. Like the city it destroyed, the flea thrives in warmth. When the air turns cold, the flea becomes sluggish. It reproduces slower. Its metabolism drops. The cold weather acted as a natural brake. A brake is a device for slowing or stopping a moving vehicle. The winter put the brakes on the epidemic. Let's look at the vocabulary of reduction. When a storm or a disease becomes less intense, we say it abates. Abate, of something perceived as hostile, threatening, or negative. Become less intense or widespread. The plague began to abate. We also use the verb subside. Subside, to go down to a lower or the normal level. The panic subsided. The floodwaters subsided. Imagine the scene at the parish clerk's office in mid-October. The clerk is counting the weekly deaths. His hand is shaking, but not from fear. For months, the number has been rising. 4,000, 6,000, 8,000. He counts the list for this week. He counts it again. He cannot believe it. The number is lower, significantly lower. He writes it down. He posts the bill of mortality on the church door. A crowd gathers. They do not cheer. They do not hug. They stand in silence, staring at the paper. They are afraid to hope. This emotion is called cautious optimism. Cautious optimism. A feeling of general confidence that things will go well, but tempered by a recognition that things could still go wrong. You are hopeful, but you are not stupid. You keep your guard up. This is a very useful phrase in business and politics. We are cautiously optimistic about the sales figures. In 1665, the optimism was very cautious. People still walked in the middle of the street. They still washed their coins in vinegar. But the eyes of the city began to change. The 1,000-yard stare of trauma was replaced by a flicker of life. We can describe this period as a thaw. Usually, a thaw is when ice melts, but metaphorically, it means a relaxation of hostility or tension. The frozen fear of the city was thawing. Slowly, the sounds of life began to return. Not the funeral bells, but other sounds. A hammer hitting a nail. A vendor shouting, not "bring out your dead," but "fresh coal! Buy my coal!" The return of commerce is the return of sanity. But who were the first people to break the silence? They were the survivors. And this brings us to a complex psychological concept: immunity. In the 17th century, they did not understand antibodies. They did not know how the immune system worked, but they observed a pattern. People who had caught the plague and survived, which was rare but it happened, seemed to be able to walk among the sick without getting it again. These people became valuable. They became the nurses, the grave diggers, the messengers. They wore their scars, the healed buboes, like badges of honor. They possessed a constitution that others envied. Constitution, the composition of something. In health, it refers to a person's physical state with regard to vitality, health, and strength. He has a strong constitution. As the death count dropped week after week, down to 4,000, then 2,000, then 1,000, the city began to exhale. The king, Charles II, was still in Oxford. The rich were still in their country estates. But the poor, the servants, and the shopkeepers who had survived began to reclaim their territory. This is the beginning of restoration. Restoration. The action of returning something to a former owner, place, or condition. Shutters were unbarred. The red crosses on the doors were scrubbed off or painted over. But notice the condition of the city. It was not the same city as before. The grass was still growing in the streets. The houses were dusty and cold, and the population had been decimated. Decimate. Originally a Roman military punishment where 1 in 10 soldiers was killed. Today, we use it to mean kill, destroy, or remove a large percentage of. Roughly 100,000 people had died. That was nearly 20% to 25% of the population. Every survivor had lost someone. A father, a child, a neighbor, the entire family across the street. So, while the fear was subsiding, it was replaced by grief. Grief. Deep sorrow, especially that caused by someone's death. The city was like a person waking up from a nightmare, only to realize that the injuries from the dream are real. This creates a strange atmosphere. It is a mix of relief and sorrow. In English, we might call this bittersweet. Bittersweet. aroused by pleasure tinged with suffering or pain. It was a bittersweet autumn. You are alive. You are breathing the cold air. But your table is empty. Now a new problem emerged, a practical problem. The refugees wanted to come back. The people who had fled, the runaways, heard the news. "The bills are down! London is safe!" But the people who stayed, the survivors who lived through the hell, how did they feel about the return of the rich? Did they welcome them, or did they resent them? This brings us to the vocabulary of resentment and class conflict. Resentment. Bitter indignation at having been treated unfairly. The survivors felt they had paid the price. They had kept the city standing. The rich had run away to save their own skins. As the carriages rolled back into town, clean and safe, the tension on the streets was palpable. Palpable. Able to be touched or felt. The tension was so strong it felt physical. In the next part, we are going to explore this re-entry. What happens when the abandoners return to the abandoned? We will look at the clash between the two Londons. We will see how the economy restarted and how the city tried to scrub away the memory of the death. And we will look at a very specific English idiom, business as usual. Can you ever truly go back to business as usual after the apocalypse? The plague is over, but the reckoning is just beginning. The wheels are turning again, but listen closely. This is not the slow, heavy rumble of the death carts. This is the fast, sharp clatter of expensive carriages. The horses are well fed. The passengers are wearing silk. The king is back. In February 1666, King Charles II finally returned to London. His return was the ultimate signal. It was the all-clear siren for the rest of the wealthy class. But the city they returned to was not the one they left. Imagine you are a wealthy merchant. You spent the last 6 months in a country villa, eating fresh food, breathing clean air. You roll up to your London townhouse. You step out. The street is quiet. You look at your neighbor, the cobbler, the man who stayed. He is thin. His eyes are hollow. He leans against his doorframe and watches you. He does not bow. He just stares. This moment captures the social divide. A divide is a separation or a split. The plague created a deep canyon between the leavers and the stayers. For the survivors, the return of the rich was a moment of resentment. We learned this word in the last part, but let's deepen it. Resentment is not just anger. It is anger mixed with a sense of injustice. Why did you get to live in safety while I buried my children? However, English society runs on pragmatism. Pragmatism, an approach that assesses the truth of meaning of theories or beliefs in terms of the success of their practical application. In simple terms, doing what works, not what feels good. The poor needed jobs. The rich needed servants, because their old ones were dead. So, despite the anger, the gears of the city began to mesh together again. The shops opened. The shutters came down. This brings us to a very common English idiom, business as usual. Business as usual means an ongoing and unchanging state of affairs despite difficulties or disturbances. The city tried desperately to get back to business as usual. But first, they had to clean. The houses that had been locked up for months smelled of stale air and death. The city underwent a massive purification. Purification, the removal of contaminants from something. People scrubbed their floors with vinegar. They burned brimstone, sulfur, in the rooms. They whitewashed the walls. This was literal cleaning, but it was also psychological. They were trying to scrub away the memory of the nightmare. We call this sanitizing. Sanitizing. Making something hygienic. But we also use it to mean making something seem more acceptable or pleasant than it really is. They wanted to sanitize the past. "Let us not talk of the bad times," they said. "Let us talk of the future." But the plague had changed the economic landscape. Because so many workers had died, the porters, the weavers, the apprentices, there was a severe labor shortage. Labor shortage. A situation where there are not enough workers to fill the available jobs. This is a fascinating historical paradox. The plague was a tragedy for the population, but it was an opportunity for the individual worker. If you were a carpenter who survived, you were now rare. You could demand higher wages. You had leverage. Leverage. The power to influence a person or situation to achieve a particular outcome. The balance of power shifted slightly from the masters to the workers. The bustling noise returned. But the voices of the workers were a little louder, a little more confident. The city was filling up again. We call this an influx. Influx. An arrival or entry of large numbers of people or things. The influx of returnees and new immigrants from the countryside coming to take the dead men's jobs made London crowded once more. The grass in the streets was trampled back into mud. The silence was replaced by the familiar roar of trade. To an outsider, it might have looked like London was fully healed, but if you looked closer, you would see the scars. A scar is a mark left on the skin after a wound heals. There were empty chairs in the taverns. There were new grassy mounds in the churchyards that were too big to be normal graves. And there was a jumpiness in the people. If someone coughed in a crowded room, the conversation would stop. Heads would turn. The fear had gone, but the trauma remained. Trauma. A deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Or physical injury. The city was suffering from what we might now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It was hypervigilant, and it was dry. This is a crucial detail for what is coming next. The summer of 1665 was hot. The winter was cold, but the spring and summer of 1666 were hot again. Very hot. And very dry. The wooden houses of London, which had been baked by the sun, were like tinder. Tinder. Dry, flammable material, such as wood or paper, used for lighting a fire. The city had survived the water, the fluids of the body. Now it was preparing for the fire. But before we get to the final catastrophe, we must look at how the survivors tried to make sense of it all. In the next part, we are going to look at the search for meaning. When a society collapses and rebuilds, it tells itself a story. Was it God's punishment? Was it a test? We will look at the literature and the statistics of the time. We will see how they recorded the history. We will learn vocabulary for interpretation, hindsight, and memorial. The bodies are buried. The rich are back. The wages are up. But the ghost of 1665 is still sitting in the corner of the room. A man sits at a desk. He opens a large leather-bound book. He dips a quill pen into ink. He writes a number. 97,306. This was the official body count of the Great Plague. But the man knows, and we know, that this number is a lie. It is too low. It does not count the Quakers buried in fields. It does not count the Jews. It does not count the people thrown into the pits without a name. The aftermath and the ledger. We have watched the city survive. Now, we must watch it try to comprehend. Comprehend. To grasp mentally. Understand. How do you comprehend a disaster that kills 20% of your friends? You turn to two things: statistics and stories. Let's start with the statistics. The English have a long history of record-keeping. The bills of mortality, those grim weekly lists, were collected and bound into a volume. People bought them. Why? Why would you want a book full of death counts? Because counting is a way of controlling. If you can count the dead, you can put boundaries around the horror. It makes the chaos feel finite. Finite, having limits or bounds. If the number is 97,306, it is terrible, but it is a number. It is not infinity. It is over. This is the vocabulary of quantification. Quantification. The expression or measurement of the quantity of something. But numbers are cold. They do not hold emotion. For emotion, the people turned to stories. This was the golden age of the diarist. A diarist is a person who keeps a diary, and the most famous of them all was Samuel Pepys. Pepys stayed in London. He was a naval administrator. He walked the streets. He saw the bodies. He saw the fires. And every night he went home and wrote it down. His diary is a masterpiece of observation. Observation. The action or process of observing something or someone carefully, in order to gain information. He wrote about the sad things, the emptiness, the grief. But he also wrote about the strange, human things. He wrote about buying a new wig and wondering if the hair came from a plague victim. He wrote about having affairs. He wrote about drinking wine. This teaches us a vital lesson about history and humanity. Life goes on. Even in the middle of the apocalypse, people are still people. They are vain. They are hungry. They are horny. They are selfish. Pepys shows us the banality of survival. Banality. The fact or condition of being banal. Unoriginality. But here, it means the ordinary, everyday nature of life. The plague was a horror, yes. But it was also just a Tuesday. This period also saw a shift in how people viewed causality. Causality. The relationship between cause and effect. Before the plague, the cause was almost always God. God is angry, then plague happens. But after the plague, people started asking different questions. Why did the parish of St. Giles die, but the parish of Exon survive? Why did the clean streets fare better than the dirty ones? They started to look for patterns. This is the very beginning of epidemiology. Epidemiology, the branch of medicine which deals with the incidence, distribution, and possible control of diseases. They didn't have the word yet, but they had the instinct. They started to see that filth and overcrowding were linked to death. This led to a new vocabulary of sanitation. Sanitation. Conditions relating to public health, especially the provision of clean drinking water and adequate sewage disposal. The city began to think about widening the streets, about cleaning the drains. The disaster forced the city to modernize. Modernize. Adapt something to modern needs or habits. But before they could rebuild the city with these new ideas, they needed a blank canvas. They needed the old city, the medieval maze of wood and straw, to be removed. And fate, it seems, has a dark sense of humor. Because less than 1 year after the plague ended, in September 1666, a baker in Pudding Lane forgot to put out his oven. The city was dry, the wind was strong. The plague had killed the people. The fire was coming for the buildings. In the next part, we are going to look at the double blow. How does a society handle two end-of-the-world events back to back? We will look at the Great Fire of London, but we won't focus on the flames. We will focus on the psychological impact. How did the survivors of the plague react when their houses started burning? Did they break? Or were they already toughened by the year of death? We will learn vocabulary for calamity, obliteration, and the ultimate test of endurance. The rats are gone. Now comes the ash. It started with a mistake. A baker named Thomas Fariner in a shop on Pudding Lane thought the fire in his oven was out. He went to bed. He was wrong. We are now in September 1666. The plague has mostly vanished, lingering only in the dark corners. The survivors are trying to rebuild their lives. They have just started to feel safe. And then, the city explodes. History is rarely fair, but for London, it seemed cruel. To survive a biological apocalypse, only to face a fiery one, seems like a script written by a sadist. But to understand the English language of catastrophe, we must look at how these two events fit together. The fire began on Sunday morning. By Monday, it was a beast. By Tuesday, it was an inferno. Inferno. A large fire that is dangerously out of control. It comes from the Italian word for hell. The fire moved differently than the plague. The plague was invisible, silent, and slow. The fire was bright, deafening, and fast. It consumed the wooden houses like they were paper. Remember the word tinder from the last part? The city was dry. But more importantly, the city was condemned. Condemned. Sentenced to a particular punishment. But in building terms, it means officially declared unfit for use. The medieval city of London, the narrow streets, the overhanging jetties, the straw roofs, was a death trap. It was designed perfectly for rats to hide and for fire to spread. The fire swept through the very streets that had been the centers of the infection. It destroyed St. Paul's Cathedral. It destroyed the Royal Exchange. It destroyed 13,000 houses. We call this obliteration. Obliteration. Total destruction. to wipe out completely. Imagine you are a plague survivor. You are standing on a hill outside the walls, perhaps the same hill where you buried your wife a year ago. You watch the flames eat your home. You might feel despair. You might think, God has decided to erase us. But historians look at this moment and see a terrible irony. Irony. A state of affairs or an event that seems deliberately contrary to what one expects and is often amusing as a result. Though here, it is not amusing. It is tragic. The irony is this: the fire saved the city. How? Because the fire sterilized London. It burned the filthy floorboards where the flea eggs waited. It burned the garbage in the alleys. It burned the rats in the cellars. It was a massive, violent cauterization. Cauterization. To burn the skin or flesh of a wound with a heated instrument to stop bleeding or prevent infection. The fire cauterized the wound of the plague. It cleaned the city in a way that vinegar and scrubbing never could. But for the people standing on the hill, they did not know about sterilization. They only saw ruin. Ruin. The physical destruction or disintegration of something. They were now homeless. First, they were decimated by disease. Now they were destitute from fire. This tests the limits of human endurance. Endurance. The fact or power of enduring an unpleasant or difficult process or situation without giving way. How much can a population take before it breaks? Londoners slept in tents again. They queued for bread again. The king returned, again, to ride through the camps and offer encouragement. But the mood was different this time. After the plague, there was suspicion. Is he sick? Is she infected? After the fire, there was solidarity. Solidarity. Unity or agreement of feeling or action, especially among individuals with a common interest. Everyone was covered in ash. Everyone had lost their house. The fire removed the barriers between the rich and the poor even more effectively than the grave. The merchant and the beggar were both sleeping under the same open sky. And something else happened. The slate was wiped clean. To wipe the slate clean is an idiom. It means to start fresh, to forget past mistakes and begin again. The fire destroyed the old, cramped, disease-ridden medieval city. It left a flat, smoking plain of ash. This was a tragedy, yes, but for the architects, the planners, and the dreamers, it was a blank canvas. Blank canvas. A situation in which nothing has yet been planned or decided, so that one is free to decide what happens. The Great Plague proved that the old way of living was deadly. The Great Fire proved that the old way of building was dangerous. So the city had a choice. It could rebuild the past, or it could build the future. This brings us to the concept of Renaissance. Renaissance, the revival of art and literature. But literally, it means rebirth. London was about to be reborn. But who would design it, and would they remember the lessons of the silence? In the final part, we are going to look at the legacy. We will walk through the modern city of London. We will find the hidden monuments to the year of the plague. We will learn the final set of vocabulary: commemoration, urban planning, and resurgence. We have survived the biological collapse. We have survived the structural collapse. Now, we must ask the final question. Did we learn anything? Deep beneath a supermarket in Aldgate, there is a layer of soil that is different from the rest. It is dark, it is dense, and it is full of bones. You walk over it when you buy your milk. You walk over it when you catch the train. We have reached the end of our journey through the silence. We started with the bustling port, endured the lockdown, survived the pits, and watched the city burn. Now, we stand in the aftermath. But this is not a sad ending. This is a story of resurgence. Resurgence. An increase or revival after a period of little activity, popularity, or occurrence. After the Great Fire of 1666, London did not die. It grew back, but it grew back differently. The king and the city planners, led by men like Christopher Wren, made a new rule: no more wood. The new London would be built of brick and stone. This was a massive shift in urban planning. Urban planning. The technical and political process concerned with the design and use of land and the built environment. They widened the streets. They cleared the filth. They created a city that could breathe. The plague had taught them that congestion kills. The fire had taught them that wood kills. So the new city was designed for safety. It was the birth of the modern metropolis. But what about the people? What about the memory of the 100,000 dead? Here is a strange fact about London. There are very few monuments to the Great Plague. There is a monument to the fire, a massive stone column that stands 202 feet tall. You can visit it today. It is called the Monument. But for the plague, there is almost nothing. A small plaque here, a rough stone there. Why? Because the fire was heroic. It was dramatic. It was a battle against nature. The plague was shameful. It was dirty. It involved boils, vomiting, and mass graves. Societies tend to commemorate victories, not humiliations. Commemorate. To recall and show respect for someone or something in a ceremony, or to serve as a memorial to. But the legacy of the plague is not in a statue. It is in the language. Many of the phrases we use today have roots in this era. When we say a place is like a ghost town, we are channeling the energy of 1665. When we talk about the fevers breaking, or keeping someone at arm's length, we are using the vocabulary of survival. And for you, the English learner, this journey has been about more than just history. You have learned to describe atmosphere. You have learned to describe collapse, stagnation, erosion, overwhelmed, obliteration. You have learned to describe human reaction, resilience, paranoia, solidarity, cautious optimism. This is the English of the real world. Textbooks teach you how to order a coffee, but life is not always coffee shops. Sometimes life is a crisis. Sometimes the systems break. To be truly fluent, you must be able to describe the darkness as well as the light. Let us return to that single candle in the window from part 1. The candle burned out long ago. The person who wrote the letter is dust. The house was likely burned in the fire. But the city is still here. The noise is back. The roar of the wheels is now the roar of engines. The bustling trade is now digital, invisible, flying through fiber-optic cables under the streets. But if you stop in a quiet alleyway in the city of London late at night and you listen, you can almost hear the echo. You can sense the history beneath your feet. This is the power of London. It is a city of layers. Layers. A sheet, quantity, or thickness of material, typically one of several, covering a surface or body. The Roman layer, the medieval layer, the plague layer, the fire layer, the modern layer. They are all stacked on top of each other. And the lesson of 1665 is simple. Societies are fragile. They can break. The silence can return. But humans are indelible. Indelible. Making marks that cannot be removed, not able to be forgotten or removed. We rebuild. We replant. We sing again. Thank you for walking these gritty streets with me. You have survived the year of the plague. You have expanded your mind, and you have deepened your English. The Chronicle is closed. The city is yours.